This is Sportish.
Do it better.
This is Sportish. This is Sportish. This is Sportish. This is Sportish.
This is Sportish. It's the show ostensibly about sports that we started during a global sports shutdown, even though just about everybody's back to play now. My name's Geoff Brault. I'm joined by Dr. Keith Strudler, the director of the School of Communication and Media at Montclair State University. Mike Wallace is our producer. We like to start every episode with an important question. And Keith, the important question this week is, why are you so sweaty?
I'm sweaty. Look, do we have to go now 100% behind the paywall? So we are, because yesterday was my people's holiest of holy days, and congratulations to me for once again, as far as I can tell, being inscribed in the book of life, although this year will tell that tale. And it's a shake. This is a challenging year, obviously. So because of that, we decided that we would tape in the morning following the holiday. And unlike you, I don't just roll out of bed and kind of go on with my day. I like to get up. I like to read a few websites, be informed, and go work out. So I went and rode a stationary bike in the basement, and that gets me really sweaty. And even when you shower, you still keep on sweating. And so because of that, I find myself still sitting in this basement early in the morning, sweating like a horse, and the lights are not helping. And that's the problem. And then I've also got this, I think part of the issue might also be I've got this brand new webcam working. And so I've decided that I want to use an external webcam for my production, as opposed to simply the webcam that comes in the computer, the camera that comes in the computer, because it's supposedly a better quality camera, although this is a Chinese knockoff. So who knows? This may just be a giant asbestos machine for all I know. And so I'm using that, which is why if my face looks even more fishbowl than usual, that's probably the reason. So we're going to have to figure out whether or not this works, and then we'll determine whether I want to continue down this path.
Do you realize that now, today, this morning, and as Keith alluded to, we're taping this on the morning of Tuesday, September 29th, that you have exactly two similarities with Sandy Koufax?
Well, I sat out Yom Kippur.
That's right. That's right. You and Sandy would not work on Yom Kippur. And
two, both elite level athletes.
Nope. You both got to work with one of the greatest broadcasters of all time.
Is Mike Briggs coming on the show?
Just depends on how far down the list you're willing to go.
Next up on the show, Iron Eagle.
While you were atoning this weekend, do you know what I was doing?
Probably playing golf, debauchery, any of the number of hobbies of Sodom and Gomorrah. I don't know.
I rode in a hot air balloon.
I did see that on Twitter. I find that to be, first of all, very on brand. There's something about that that feels very.
I actually, while I was up in it, I go to the pilot and I'm like, in the best way, this is the most ridiculous form of communication. A form of transportation, excuse me.
Yes. Yep. I mean, I assume the only thing left on your list now is a blimp, is a Hindenburg to get.
That would be the dream. The Goodyear blimp is I think the dream transport vehicle.
That's the most logical way. If Sportish does ever, I mean, certainly if we get past coronavirus and Sportish does take the show on the road, I assume we will be traveling by blimp. That's the only logical way for us to get from place to place. But the hot air balloon I find to be one of the most horrifying, frightening potential. Yeah. I think it's a death box. I mean, I think there's got to be countless undocumented deaths that happen in hot air balloons we just don't know about. You're just up there. You're suspended by hot air, nothing but hot air, right? That's it. That's the only thing.
And an envelope to hold that hot air in. It's not just like we're firing it out into the atmosphere and hoping we catch a drift.
Generally speaking, when I'm in an airplane, I have these moments of thought where I wonder why a toothpaste shaped piece of metal is able to propel itself through the air with tens of thousands of pounds of weight on it, seemingly with these two small little engines that apparently can get shut down by a bird at a moment's notice. I often wonder how that works. And I try to keep myself thinking about that by being distracted by like, oh, peanuts or something like that. But generally speaking, I'm not convinced that planes really should work. There is no way that I'm going to be convinced that a fire, a little flame. And by the way, I just feel like even just like a little shaking back, how high does that thing come up? Is it?
How high can the balloon go?
No. How high does the basket come up to your?
Oh, it's about mid chest, maybe a little lower, at least over your waist.
No. That's one. That's one argument with your partner away from plummeting to your death.
Well, I mean, listen, you choose your ballooning companions on your own time. Yeah. So it doesn't feel at all unsafe. It doesn't, because there's no engine or anything like that. It never feels like you're climbing. So you don't get that effect of like going up the ramp on the roller coaster or anything like that. You're just sort of floating. The scariest part, honestly, is when you get like 50 or so feet off the ground and you're like, oh, this is unnatural. I shouldn't be here. And then after you get up past like 100 or 200 feet or so, it really doesn't feel like you're going higher. You just all of a sudden you're like, wait, I'm much higher than I was 5 seconds ago, and I don't know how we got up.
You know how I would feel it, but I look down and I see something that was what is my house that looks like a postage stamp. That's how I would know. The other thing, so the only way I would get through that is the way I've gotten through the limited number of rides I've taken on a roller coaster, and that is at some point to simply cede my death to a higher power and assume, right? You give in to the release of death and you say, well, that was a good run. And then, you're pleasantly surprised when the ride ends. That's the only way I could get through that. I don't want to try to rationalize how I might make it through. And that includes anything like Space Mountain. I mean, things as benign as the teacups. I do not like rides.
So you approach amusement parks the way UFC champion Izzy Adesanya, who just won a big fight over the weekend. When he gets into the ring, has been known to look across at his opponent and yell and speak to himself, "I am prepared to die." So he uses the same theory to engage in MMA combat that you do to engage with the loop-de-loop at Hershey Park.
First of all, I'd never go on that. I don't trust the engineers. It's one bad day. It's one bad day is what that is. One bad day. I'll tell you what, how intimidating is that when you're like, look, I just got to hit a couple lefts, a couple right. And then he walks and he's like, just FYI, I will fight you to the death. Because you're like, well, after the fight, I got to do publicity, and then we're going on vacation. He's like, just before you make any future plans, from my perspective, this may be the end. I'm comfortable with that. You walk off. I walk and you call it, right? You're done.
I mean, we've already discussed on the show how I would feel in any of these sort of combat situations. And the answer in this scenario is exactly the same as the answer in what do you do if you wake up across the ring from Mike Tyson? Somebody get the mop, clean up on aisle 3.
And that cleanup's not blood. It's not blood.
No, I mean, there could be. It's really just out of all fluids, just evacuating at once. It's impossible to say what will be cleaned up. Probably just a hodgepodge of internal goo and just all coming down.
We say it's about 20% bile.
Let's get into our program. So we started this show to chronicle sports coming back in the time of coronavirus, and they are lining up fast and furious to come back. Pac-12 is coming back. Mountain West is coming back. All the FBS conferences, except for the MAC, the first one to shut down, are probably going to play some kind of football this year. We're going to talk a little bit about that. I think one of the most impressive accomplishments in sports history has just happened, and that is LeBron James making 9 of 10 NBA finals. I know it's such a sports show thing to be like, well, how does LeBron fit into history? But I'm actually shocked that isn't being talked about more, how impressive that is. We also had, over the last couple days, the first championship celebration since coronavirus began. The Tampa Bay Lightning won the Stanley Cup, and Florida went full Florida. Plus, the New York Mets, they've got a new owner, and they've got hope. And as a fan of the Philadelphia Phillies, I'm so glad to see it because pride comes before the fall. Let's start with college football coming back to play. The Pac-12 coming back. And under much the same rules and regs as the Big Ten. They're going to do daily testing. They actually believe they have they're sort of pioneering this new rapid testing. And as we got into last episode, Keith, and my opinion hasn't changed, if you can do daily testing, I think you can play. Your other protocols will have to be in place. But really, if you could test every day, I think you can do just about anything in the time of coronavirus.
Yeah, if you're taking those kind of strict precautions, and if everyone kind of buys into the ethos of what you need to do to keep yourself relatively safe. I think it's like anything. It's a combination of factors that can help you to keep, even if there's a breakout, to a very limited, it's one person, they isolate and they move forward. I agree. If they can get that kind of testing, it begs the question, why can't we all get that kind of testing? Why is it only football teams on the West Coast? But that's for tonight's debate, to mark exactly why can't we get the same testing as the Pac-12, as Oregon State football? So I do agree with that. I think one of the interesting things, look, everyone assumed, and I believe you said this, Pac-12 is not coming back. Right. Yeah. You've said that. And we now need to, this is like when a car, like in a movie, is willing to go through any barricade set up on the highway that's meant to stop you. This train, this truck is not going to stop, no matter how many times the sign says bridge out. They're going to keep going. So I think what was interesting in all of this, it's not so much that they decided to come back. I think once the Big Ten decided to come back, and there was a recognition that every team had a potential chance to get into the college football championship, and to have one conference left out, particularly the conference that I think most would suggest is having the hardest time competing on a national scale of the Power 5 conferences. I'm sure there was a little bit of pressure from fans and alumni as they, as we go through championship after championship without a real presence from the Pac-12. And certainly as contracts get rewritten and, all that. I think one of the more interesting things was the recognition from the college presidents and the athletic directors that budget is a serious consideration of why they did it. And you saw this from the UC Berkeley, I believe it was the president who said, it was either the president or athletic director who said, we're going to be honest with you, if we didn't play football, there was concerns that we were not going to be able to fund the rest of our athletic department. And Berkeley is not typically a school known for putting sports in front of it. That is perhaps the highest ranked public institution in America. So I think when it comes to that point where even places far more well known for their academics and their athletics are starting to say, look, it really is about the money. I think we should all just recognize that, and in some ways simply accept that as the reality in today's modern college football.
Well, that's why I really thought they weren't going to play in the Pac-12. The reason that you got schools like Stanford and like Cal. Also the fact that, most of the Pacific Northwest is on fire, but I guess that doesn't so much matter. But they are coming back to do it now.
Atmosphere.
Now, look, I think they're coming back to do it in as responsible a way as you can do it with the testing protocols that they've put in place. And that's true of the Big Ten too. It's gotten to the point now where I think the leagues, because a lot of people are like, oh, how are you doing this? The Big Ten, the Pac-12, you're putting your student athletes in danger. Their plan's good as it can be. And I'm not of the opinion that we just need to shut the entire world down and all stay in our houses. Like, I feel like there are smart ways to do everything, and there's smart ways to play football. The leagues that are now doing their athletes a disservice are the ones that aren't following the protocols that the Big Ten and the Pac-12 are, the ones that never shut down their season, that didn't delay at all. Those are the ones that are putting athletes at risk. I wonder, Keith, do you think that the protocols of the Big Ten and the Pac-12 are going to trickle into other leagues that aren't doing what they're doing?
Probably not, unless we get some kind of breakout. So if there is, if all of a sudden, Missouri and Alabama each have to sit out a couple of weeks, we'll probably start, because that starts to hit them at the bottom line. And then all of a sudden CBS doesn't have their game of the week. I think unless you start to see that, I don't think you're going to see the testing protocols change, because what it would take would be political pressure from the governors and state assemblies. And I don't think that's coming. I think they were very clear, like, we want football. It's up to you. And I think this has been, working at a university, in many ways, state governments are worried about K through 12. And in some ways they've kind of ceded higher ed to the institutions themselves. So like, you guys figure, you work enough for the university. Like, they're like, we can't figure this out. Good luck.
Did you see, and this is in Louisiana, so keep that in the back of your mind, that the Attorney General of the state of Louisiana blamed the governor of Louisiana for LSU losing to Mississippi State because he said that this is what happens when you only put 21,000 fans or whatever in Death Valley, a stadium that can hold, 90,000. The attorney general of a state in our union blamed the governor for his college football team's loss because he didn't allow enough fans into the stands. That is where we are at as it comes to college football versus trying to prevent people from getting sick.
Let's be clear. Unacceptable loss.
Come on, but is it though? It's Mike Leach. It's air raid.
Well, I was going to say, too.
It's an unacceptable loss.
Do not underestimate Mike Leach. Do not underestimate Mike Leach. Mike Leach will lose when he wants to lose, and he'll self-implode on his own schedule. He'll find a barn to go ahead and lock some kids in. But in a meaningless first game he will overperform. You don't worry about that, but he'll find a way. Just wait till press conference number 7. He'll find a way to self-implode. Don't worry. So is LSU out of the national championship race? Is that where we are?
They might be. Them in Oklahoma. They might be out. I mean, normally in a normal year, you get 11 chances. You don't get that many this year. Just ask Houston. How about the University of Houston? Haven't played a game yet. All 4 of their games have been canceled.
Well, as someone who grew up in Houston, of course, it was very sad to not be able to experience the Bayou Bucket game early in the season. That, of course, Houston and Rice, perhaps the most irrelevant of the city battles. I don't think anyone's really excited about that. But who knows? And Houston, look, it's been a relatively hard hit city, but that is one of the schools you're talking about. One of those schools that is certainly plays big time college football, but is not well resourced enough, nor perhaps does it have the political kind of might to enforce the kind of testing that you're seeing at Stanford and UCLA and so forth.
Yeah, those are the schools that I think are doing a disservice to their athletes.
Yeah,
the ones
probably.
that need them to play for the money, but can't afford the money required for them to play safely. Those are the athletes that I think are in a tough spot. And the Mountain West underscores that, right? They're trying to come back to play. And unlike the Big Ten and unlike the Pac-12, they're like, yeah, we haven't decided on a testing protocol yet, but we have decided we're going to play a schedule. That seems like it's the wrong order in which those decisions should have been made.
Yeah, cool. That cool mountain air, though. A lot of outdoor activity. The challenge, how many of these schools are playing indoors? And I haven't really, most of these college football teams play outdoors.
Not that many.
Is Minnesota playing indoors?
I don't believe they have an outdoor stadium. I'm trying to, domes, you got Syracuse. Yeah. And I'm struggling to think of another for college football.
Yeah. So, they're able to keep everyone outdoors. The fan, look, I know we'll get in this later. The fan situation is very hard to get your head around. Sometimes you turn on the game and you're like, oh, they're doing a really good job with piping in that fake crowd noise. And then you're like, oh, that's not fake.
Yeah. You're like, oh, they're there. Yeah. Overarching question that I was thinking about the other day. Is college football going well? They're playing. A lot of schools are. A lot of schools are having single games canceled. That hasn't gotten nearly as much coverage as I thought it would when schools weren't playing games. Just kind of be like, oh, yeah, that game's postponed this week. We're going to try to reschedule. When you got athletic directors on Twitter, trying to get a date, they're like, hey, anybody healthy and can come play this weekend? But, I was
can you get 11 of your friends to show up? You must get to Alabama. It's a great question.
It's hard. It's really hard to decide because the games are happening. Tons of schools, by the way, are playing not at full strength because of players that are out because of the virus protocols. But most of them are playing, but tons of these athletes are testing positive for coronavirus. We don't really know what kind of effect that's going to have on their lives, to the point where, as we talked about last week, LSU, their head coach, Ed Orgeron, has basically said, well, my entire team's had it. Not a great thing to say, but another thing that nobody really cared about. They were just kind of like, all right, well, good. Hope those kids are all right. So it's really hard for me to decide.
Apparently they weren't all right. Didn't seem to go well week 1. So was one of the side effects of having coronavirus, bad decision-making at the QB spot?
Joe Burrow ain't walking through that door. Joe Burrow's out here pitching his way to a tie against the Philadelphia Eagles. Keith, what's your opinion? You think it's going well?
I think it depends what kind of litmus it depends what you decide going well is. So I think in one regard, college football athletic directors decided they could not afford to take a full year off. I mean, it was in some ways, and you can agree or disagree with this, but they decided it was something of a non-starter to actually sit an entire year out of football. In some because of the lost revenue, in some because of the momentum, in some because what it might have done to their college enrollments overall. So they basically said, look, we can't afford as Power 5 football teams that maintain $100 million plus athletic budgets that rely on this for everything from kind of donor relations to enrollment strategies, like the University of Alabama that has, I think, over half of their students from out of state, and they're not coming because they heard, with all due respect to Andy Billings, that Alabama is the center of intellectual thought in this country. I mean, because we all know that's Mississippi. And so apologies, of course, to all our Mississippi viewers. Who are probably have the ability to watch us in Central Time Zone. Congratulations. You can go to sleep at a relatively normal hour. But I think so. If you use that as your litmus, you say, look, we need to have a season. It's important for us to get through and have some kind of championship. Then I suppose, yes, in some regard, it'll help with recruiting. In some regard, it is a success, right? And yes, there have been plenty of breakouts, but it's not like the entire teams are falling. They're getting teams out there. They're traveling and so forth. I guess you could say it's a success. Now, there will be other people. Look, there's a lot of ways you can say it's not successful. You still do have breakouts. It's not as if everyone's playing. I'm not going to suggest that the quality of play it's fine, but we've seen it. Although let's be quite honest, the beginning of every season is a disaster. There's a reason why you schedule, like, again, I'm just offending Sacred Heart in your first week if you're Syracuse, because you know you're going to play poorly. So there's that. I think there are still certain people that think that it's unfair that football teams are being treated differently than the rest of the college campus. And there's some of these college campuses are going in full quarantine and the teams are still playing. So some people might suggest it's not going well. That's a more nuanced argument. There's the other side of it, which is no matter how much they're able to kind of stay in the black and they're able to make money, they're still losing a lot of money this season. They're not selling any tickets, right? Yep. And it's a shortened season. They're still paying coaching staffs. It's a very expensive sport to operate. And one of their largest drivers of revenue, particularly for the non-Power 5 conferences, the UCFs and the Houstons, they're not making it. And so they're going to come out. The best case scenario is they don't come out as bad as it would have been. So by that regard, there was no way to really come out well this year.
And I wonder if it's not so much the bottom line money in the bank this year, because, I don't know how much of a profit you're going to make off college football. And there are those ancillary costs that you talk about of our students going to be on campus if we're not playing college football. And those things are baked into the cake. But I wonder, we're up in the Northeast where college football is not a religion. People are not fanatical about it up here. I wonder if when you put yourself in the mind space of people that live in the South or the Midwest, or the places where college football is your identity, if these athletic directors and these college presidents felt so much pressure in their communities, not because of the true cost, the dollars cost of not playing, but the program prestige cost, the ability to recruit costs of if Ohio State didn't have football. And then every time Ohio State went up against an SEC school for a recruit, Ohio State was always the team that doesn't care enough about football to play. So why would you go there? Type of cost. I mean, these are people that put footballs in the cribs of babies to say, one day you're going to play for the Crimson Tide. And I really wonder if it became a reputational thing when the SEC and they weren't the only ones, but essentially when the SEC was like, nothing will stop this train. We will play football until the asteroid crashes down into Lake Erie. If they felt that they had to do it because of the reputational hit.
Was that a Bruce Willis reference? Was that?
I mean, kind of. It could have been an Armageddon reference. It could have been a Deep Impact reference. Which asteroid movie do you prefer? Also, do you know what I did there? Is because, again, in the Northeast, couldn't think of a southern lake. So I just had to pick a lake. I was like, what's the first lake that comes to my mind? Erie.
Lake Pontchartrain. Lake Pontchartrain. That would have been better. That's Louisiana.
That would have been a good one. But you know what? They've suffered enough. Fair
point. So I would say, it's interesting. we all thought that the agenda setter might be the Ivy League for saying once they put the stake in the ground saying you can't play during a pandemic, everyone would look bad for not doing it. Maybe it was the opposite. Once a conference put a stake in the ground and said you can play during a pandemic, everyone else looked foolish for not being able to do it. So I think you're probably right in a lot of regards. There was a ton of pressure to play because of all the ancillary kind of and psychological and sociological issues that come with not playing football. And that's a big part of it. I do think, though, and I think, and again, I think the Pac-12 said it very clearly. I do think as they are now, universities are now counting the tens and in some cases hundreds of $1 million they are coming up short this year, and they're having to decide who they're going to furlough. You don't play football. Are you going to furlough your entire athletic department? And that's a real question. And how do you look?
Yeah, it is.
This is the other. Are you going to pay a college football coach $10 million to do some Zoom sessions? This is they're not professors, right? Like their performance is very much measured in person on the field of play. You can't have a Madden tournament and pay them, $8 million, pay Ed Ogeron $8 million a year. And so what are you going to do with that? It's a really hard question to answer of how you're paying someone that kind of exorbitant. Dabo Swinney, is he worth $8 million when you don't play a game? Like that's just, I mean, I would imagine any business person would say, if you guys aren't playing for an entire year and you have a staff that makes, $15 million or $12 million, whatever it is, $12 million, you're going to have to cut a lot of it. And you're going to pay your coaches. That becomes a really, really difficult thing because then you're almost sidelining football for 2 years.
Yeah.
Now, the argument might be this is what needed to happen. We don't need college football coaches making $5 million a year. So, there's the counter argument that I'm sure you'll hear from the other side.
The other argument for why a lot of people think sports should not be happening is because sports encourage gatherings, right? You brought up how weird the stadiums look, whether they look weird. They look weird for two reasons, because of how many people are there and because of how many people aren't there all at the same time. I think a huge reason why a lot of people like sports is because they're social. They encourage people to go to bars, to get together with their friends, to go tailgating, to actually go to games and have, a live in-person experience. They also bring people together in such a way that when they go well, as when a team wins a championship, everybody just kind of explodes in collective joy. We've all seen the burning couches on college campuses when a team wins a national championship. We've all seen the giant parades when a team wins a Super Bowl. So the Tampa Bay Lightning became the first team to win a championship in the time of coronavirus. They beat the Dallas Stars. They won the Stanley Cup. And Tampa went insane. They did exactly what, every other city has done when their team wins a championship. They all rushed into the streets and hung out together and did some yelling and some screaming. Problem is, right now, that's about the most dangerous thing you can do in the world, especially in Florida, which has decided that they're just fully open, back to normal, despite the fact that they're statistically in as bad a place now as they have been at any point during this pandemic. Is that a reason why people should have considered perhaps playing sports in a bubble environment, in a non-bubble environment? Just playing sports at all is something that we shouldn't be taking on at this time because people can't be trusted not to do what they did in Florida.
Well, look, I mean, I think the message here is if you need to burn a couch, you should be burning it inside of your own house. By the way, I always liked it when, again, I'm just going to offend her, when the University of Maryland, they burn couches even when they lose. They'd be like, we lost in the second round of the NCAA tournament. It's a good time to burn some couches. So, I don't think that's a sports problem. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the whole riot in the street after you win a championship. I feel like that's really a problematic kind of position in the first place. But I would suggest that is very much that's a political problem, right? That's a messaging politics issue, not one necessarily inherently related to sport. If the messaging from your governor, your state assembly, your politicians, national government, sports leaders and so forth is, hey, we're going to play these games, but, particularly in the two towns that are playing for the championship, there's not going to be any parades. There's not going to be and you clamp it down. That's very different than what's probably happening in Florida, which is a very different set of messaging, which is, hey, of course you can go to the Outback. Why wouldn't you want your $12 ribeye? Is this the part of the show where we make fun of the Outback?
Again, Keith, will you go a single week without burning a potential sponsor? Just go 1 week. without burning one.
I don't want. Look, I'm a vegetarian. I don't want the Outback's money. That's not
eat the
true.
onion then. Eat the onion.
the bloomin' onion. So I will say, when I was in grad school, there was an Outback, and they used to have in Gainesville, they used to have a 2-for-1 appetizer, and it was like early, and then it was like after 10. And so you'd go 10 or something like that. You'd go there at like 10, and you'd order up a couple bloomin' onions and some cocktails. Can you imagine?
Did you have a roommate?
No, you'd go. I mean, it was for the crowd. But think about that, being able to get yourself some big bloomin' onions, and it was a heavy evening though.
Sounds like a
Gainesville's not a
biohazard.
healthy town. Yeah, they're delicious. They're delicious.
They're delicious. And the dipping sauce, that's what makes it.
It's like a Thousand Islands kind of situation.
Yeah, but it's got a little kick to it, a little spice.
Yeah,
maybe put some
like
cumin in there.
Chipotle. It's like a Chipotle Thousand Islands. It's I haven't had a bloomin' onion in a long time. It used to be them and Chili's would make the bloomin' onions.
Sure.
Chili's really kind of created the bloomin' onion, if I'm not mistaken.
I thought Outback did.
I thought it was Chili's that started the bloomin' onion.
Chili's
is disappointing because they were so close in so many
Stop
areas.
burning sponsors. Why don't you tell me why they're so great? The thick cut bacon on the Southwest burger really hits the spot.
But they're so close, and they portray themselves as like a Tex-Mex restaurant, but they're really not. They're really not a. I mean, they had fajitas, but that's really it. That was kind of. I didn't feel like they went, and then they sold out, and now it's. I mean, it's.
Yeah, you were upset when Chili's sold out. Okay. While we're talking about championships, LeBron James playing for another one.
Yeah.
He's been to 9 of the last 10 NBA finals. That, to me, and he's done it with 3 different teams, that, to me, is one of the most remarkable accomplishments in the history of sport. That, to me, is stunningly impressive. And clearly, a lot of people don't share my view because people just sort of mention that as an afterthought. They're like, by the way, LeBron, back in the finals, 9 to 10 times. I'm like, I feel like that should be getting more credit for how impressive it is.
And it's very hard for him to make vacation plans now.
Yes.
In the end of the year, everyone else is out golfing. Now, there's a bunch of things we can say about that. I tend to agree. While I've always said I'm not a huge LeBron fan, on the other hand, it's hard to not give LeBron his full due for, you could arguably say, the greatest basketball player of all time. It's a very valid, and I don't want to get into this like, Kobe. Like, it's just, it's not.
No, we're not doing it.
I have no idea.
We're not doing it. They're all great. They're all great.
Oscar Robinson. Well, I like when people go back.
What about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar? He scored the most points. Nobody ever talks about him. Anyway, we're not doing it. They literally changed the rules for Lou. They changed the rules.
But I like it when people go back like 50 years and they're like, oh, if he were playing today, I'm like, if he were playing today, he would be in the D League and the G League if they're lucky. Like, I mean, right. This is evolution. Like, this is what happened. This is like,
I do love it. They do that in baseball all the time. Like, what if Babe Ruth played there? I'm like, he might have struggled with the night games. Like it's a totally different world.
It really is. People do this, and there's some objective sports when you can look at track and be like, the Olympic winner would not have made the trials in the women's side now. I mean, this is it's a silly argument. Everything is in the context of its time period, and even the greatest athletes have to exist within that. For LeBron, though, there's a couple things you can say about how amazing that. And one is simply the wear and tear of playing 9 out of 10. I mean, you're playing these incredibly extended seasons,
it's almost 100 games a year.
Yes, and you're the go-to. He's never been on a team where he's the second option. Even now with Anthony Davis, it's got to be LeBron that carries. And Anthony Davis is great, right? Mm-hmm. But he's always the point person. He's always going to get the most attention. He's always going to be the person that has to carry. He cannot sit out a playoff game. I mean, so he's always got to put in the biggest minutes. So, for all that Michael Jordan did, he took some years off. Like that helped
quite literally.
So,
and we're not talking about load management. We're talking about he literally went to play baseball. Took some years off, went to Birmingham to find himself. Who hasn't?
So we spent a couple nights in Birmingham, although we didn't really get out there. But kind It seems like a sleepy town for Jordan. It really does.
Yeah, I wonder if that was part of the deal. No, no state-sanctioned casinos.
Yeah. So there's A, which is the amount of strain on his body that he kept coming back year after year after year and doing it. And secondly, I would say for LeBron, the thing that I was always most impressed about was that wherever he left, usually that team literally would fall apart, right?
Yeah.
They'd be like, well, LeBron's gone. They're going to win 14 games the next year, right? And that, I mean, it became very apparent that, you can kind of measure kind of how good someone is by the delta of what it looks like when that person's not in the game. And they have stats for that, obviously, certainly in hockey and in basketball. When he leaves a town, and sometimes the whole team fell apart, but literally, no matter, even if most of the team stayed relatively in place, it all fell apart. And wherever he went, they were instantly, as you can tell, in a 9 out of 10 years, they were a championship contender right away. That is, I think, one of the more insane remark. I don't think you can find another player in any sport in history that has had that kind of trajectory. Wherever they go, they bring basically the bullseye of they're likely to win a championship, and then actually kind of actualizes that by getting them into the finals. And you can say whatever you want about winning final, losing final. There's a lot that goes into whether or not you win or lose a finals, namely the other team, team you're playing. So.
It's strange because I think that LeBron making 9 of 10 finals and winning a handful of them, losing some as well, it, in my opinion, is in the discussion for most impressive accomplishment in the history of sports. Absolutely. I believe number one also has to deal with people that have lost in the finals. I think the most impressive thing in the history of sports is the Butler Bulldogs making back-to-back NCAA national championship games.
It's up there.
When you recognize the way the deck is stacked against teams like Butler, and Butler, when they did that in the early 2010s, when they did that, they were not the Butler that they are today with the resources that they had in the league that they were in. They were a true mid-major playing with 20% of the budget of the teams that they were going against. And they made, not just one Cinderella run to get to the championship because the ball bounced the right way. Back-to-back national championship games, that to me is number one in terms of impressive sporting accomplishments. LeBron might be number two.
Yeah. Well, you're, of course, showing your bias towards mid-major basketball, but I tend to agree with you on the ball, because the thing with the NCAA tournament is, even if you are by and large or far and away the best team in the NCAA tournament, making the finals is still almost impossible. I mean, you got to win a lot of games in a row against some pretty good basketball teams, and anything can. I mean, how many great Kentucky teams just happen to have a bad day, right? How many North Carolina teams just happen to have a bad day? Butler, you're right. It's almost as if they should not be playing the same sport as some of these. Right. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I agree. Look, if we're to go top three, I'm kind of with you. And I don't know the order. I will always go Lance winning 7 tours as number one, because it's so impossible. And again, they were gunning for him, and winning the Tour de France is pretty difficult. All right. Although
I agree.
The way you categorize the sport,
there is a massive asterisk next. And I am on your side. I don't think he was cheating, because I don't think he was doing anything everybody else wasn't doing. Yeah. But to me, it's hard to put that on the list just because
it's hard. Obviously, you put Butler. And you put LeBron's, 9 out of 10. And look, the Gators won 2 national championships in a row. That was when they had the best team in the country, I think, at that point by a lot. And they had a fantastic coach, and they had incredible resources, right? I mean, it's the University of Florida football money. And even that, winning those 2 national championships in a row, was incredible. I mean, it just didn't make sense. So I agree. The Butler story, I mean, the challenge is they will never, it's kind of like when you peak early in your life and something happens.
Sure. Yeah.
Like when you date someone that's really attractive.
Yeah. No, I mean,
the rest of your life becomes realizing, not even trying to live up to that, just the recognition that it will never happen again. It's a tough thing to live down.
It's I think, a very difficult thing. And especially the two hosts of this program, to get to the mountaintop, but have a brief stay there. That's tough. Because on one hand, you got there, right? Yeah. And getting there, nobody could take it away from. I think Conan O'Brien said this when he was being pushed out of the Tonight Show. He's like, I achieved my dream. It ended weirdly, and I achieved it for 6 months, but I achieved it. And there's something to be said for that. And then there's also something to be said for if you got there and you aren't there, you know what you're missing, and you know what you're not having, and you know what you've lost, and that's tough too.
Is it better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all? I'm of the ilk. I don't know. It's tough. It's tough to look back. It's tough to look back and say, boy, I was dating a supermodel. Now I'm not.
Before this gets too sad, let's make fun of the Mets. They got a new owner. Steve Cohen is going to relieve the Wilpons of their controlling interest in the New York Mets, which is something that Mets fans love, and I think as well they should. Let's start with the dollars. Steve Cohen, more than $2 billion to be the owner of the New York Metropolitans. They play the sport of baseball, which a lot of people will tell you is dying or struggling. I think there's plenty of data that shows that that's not happening in regular times. An awful lot of people go to these games, and these franchises still make a ton of money, as evidenced by the fact that their players are making a ton of money. But look, baseball's place in society is certainly not what it was 20, 50 years ago. $2 billion, Keith, to own the New York Mets. Obviously, I don't know what it's like to have anything approaching that kind of money. And I actually do feel like if I had that kind of money, I would want to own a sports team, because what's the difference between 2 and 4 billion? And the prestige of owning and the prestige. I know the only enough money is more money. I know. But I do feel like at a certain point when you're like, well, with this amount of money, I can buy everything and I want, have all my needs taken care of. And with this amount of money, I can buy everything I want, have all my needs taken care of, and own a baseball team. I'm probably going to choose column B. So, I mean, I get it, but boy, that's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money to throw down, especially when, for the privilege of that, you are, generally speaking, just buying the right to be reviled by the largest metropolitan area in the United States. I mean, they're particularly owning the Mets. Owning the Mets and owning the Clippers may be the two most thankless positions in all of sport, right? You have just bought yourself the right to be disregarded and afterthought and largely kind of mocked in your own town. And so it's a tough one. So there must be some kind of joy. There must be some kind of joy of own. And the other problem with owning a sports team. So if you bought a $100,000 sports car, which I could never understand. You know this about me. I would drive a go-kart to work if they let me. Like I do. I take to me, cars mean absolutely nothing, right? I could not care less. I don't care what people think about the car. People are like, well, someone will see you. I'll be like, good. They'll know that I don't waste money. And then I don't have to give them a ride. So to me, cars, that kind of stuff. But if you spent $100,000, $200,000 in a car, you'd probably want to drive it. Like that would be the idea. The problem is you buy a baseball team for a couple $2 billion and people will say the owner should not be meddling with the business operations of the baseball team.
Oh, no. I think it's – so this is why I think – I liked you brought up the Clippers, right? Because Steve Ballmer also paid $2 billion to own the Clippers. Huge difference to me, though, between being an NBA owner and being an MLB owner, especially an owner of the Mets. So in the NBA, you're in a salary cap league and the owner can come in and they can change the culture and they can be like, we're going to renovate locker rooms. We're going to have a really nice team playing. Sure, you can absolutely do all those things and that matters, right, in terms of attracting players. But at the end of the day, you're in a salary cap league. Yeah. So you only have so much money to work with. In Major League Baseball, that is not at all the case. And here's the problem for Steve Cohen. Every single Mets fan that I know places all of the blame on the Mets' struggles over the last however many years on the ownership group and their frugality and their shortcomings, which means that they are now looking at Steve Cohen as the savior of all of their problems. And the way in Major League Baseball that you solve problems is by spending tons and tons of money, crossing your fingers, and then possibly needing to spend tons and tons of money to correct your first mistakes, and then crossing your fingers again. Like baseball without a salary cap is oftentimes driven by who's willing to put up the most. And now you can look at, somewhere like Oakland, who's been very successful in not putting up large amounts of money, but has never really come close to winning a World Series in the spending era. And the Mets, that's not going to fly. They're not interested in we won a couple wild cards. Yep. We're in the playoffs. We're winning about 75, 80 games a year. Nope. Like, this is cool. We're on an upward trajectory. No. They're like, you need to go to Anaheim and you need to buy out Mike Trout's contract. And then you need to go to Houston and you need to buy out Alex Bregman's contract. Like, yep. That's what we're dealing with here.
Yeah. You have to basically out-Dodger the Dodgers right now, right?
Yeah.
You really have to go in full. You're right. And I think that's the most frustrating part. So you're an owner and you spend that kind of money and you've bought yourself like a 20% chance now, right? So you can spend $300 million. You're like, for that, I have a 22% chance of winning this whole thing. And you're going to run up against a team that spends $108 million and happen to have lucked into some good draft picks or whatever it is, and they're going to beat you. And there's going to be a matchup issue, and your best pitcher is going to tear a hamstring or something, and you're not going to win. And then you're going to say, well, that was good. I got to spend. Now they want to get renewed. I got to spend another $200. Yeah. This is, I don't understand wanting to own a sports team. It seems highly frustrating. It seems why not I would rather just own like a box. Oh, I will say this. If I'm going to own a sports team, I'm going in one of like the lower end. Like, I think several years ago, getting into the MLS game, that feels nice. Now it's expensive. Now it's a few $100 million for an MLS team.
Yeah.
But when you can get those things for 20, 30, yeah, but that's a little
kind of, MLS is kind of like a cartel. It's sort of designed as a money-making operation for its owners. Honestly, I think it's much the same reason why people want to get into politics. Everybody knows it's awful and it's going to drain you of all of these things: money, pride, desire. But I think those people have this odd thing where they're like, yeah, I know that, but I'm different. I can fix it. And I think there's some of that with people that want to own sports teams. They're like, yeah, everybody says it's terrible, but you know what? Huge status symbol. It's the same reason people spend all that money on a car.
I built Microsoft. I can do this.
Right? Yeah. There's nobody who buys a $200,000 car who's going to argue that it's like a good investment. I mean, yes, there are. I understand there are some that, but most of them aren't. They're not people that are going to be like, oh, I bought this because I'm a savvy businessman.
Is this where we start? Is this where we start the watch discussion part of the show?
Kind of. It's similar. And now that you got me all fired up, now that you brought that up, I cannot have you attacking wristwatches. So we're going to end the show here. Good luck to Steve Cohen and the Mets. We really hope the best for them. Got to thank our producer, Mike Wallace, Dr. Keith Strudler, who co-hosts this situation. He's the director of the School of Communication and Media at Montclair State University. I'm Geoff Brault. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday on For the Fans. Download our podcast. Have a good one. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Sportish. See you next time.